For this morning's moment of learning, I'm going to cover a couple of groups in the time of Jesus that are in Jerusalem. I may get to wing it. Oh, there we go. Who are the Pharisees and the Sadducees? We hear these names a lot, and you've probably heard them explained a little bit before, but I think it's worthwhile. Part of the whole purpose of having the moment of learning is just making sure that everybody's on the same page. You'll learn one thing about me, if you haven't learned it already, is that I like to demystify Christianese, things that we just... It's a nice way to say it, but I like to get rid of all the language that maybe we've learned our entire life that would be some sort of barrier for somebody who hadn't learned that same sort of thing. Because the gospel needs to be very open and approachable by everybody. So I think it's helpful to go back and remember and be reminded of some of the things that some of us may already know, but it's helpful, and sometimes it's a good reminder for us, and sometimes I've had several people say, hey, I didn't know that. I learned something. So we're going to talk about the Pharisees and the Sadducees today, and I'm going to do a quick flyby. In other words, there's not going to be very much discussion about this. Looks like I'm going to get to wing it. I'm having trouble flipping the things here. Okay, so the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Basically, there were two groups of people who were in religious political power at the era of Jesus, at the time when he was there. And so when he was there, the Pharisees and Sadducees, and you also hear about the chief priests and the elders, and without making a long story short, basically the Sadducees were a more political but definitely with a foot in the religious, and the Pharisees were more of a religious with a foot in the political. The Pharisees, and you hear more about them, they were more kind of like the evangelicals of their day, so to speak. They were more in tune with what was going on in the scriptures and so forth. And that may not have been a fair comparison, but they were strong believers in scriptures. Look at there, I go. They were strong believers in scripture, and they took the entire portion of Scripture. But the other thing about them is that they were looked at by society as kind of the example, to be the model of what religious fervency and zeal. They were very zealous. They were very strong believers, and they believed strongly in purity and rituals, and they were intensely loyal to God and prideful of their own righteousness. Now, we heard that word pride, and we know in Christianity, we're talking about, we want to reduce pride, but I think in their sense, they were prideful in the sense that they were glad they were as righteous as they were. So they didn't necessarily look at it as a bad thing, such that they would even avoid the unrighteous sinners and anything that would defile their own purity. So they looked at this as something they are trying to become more righteous, more like God, or more able to be righteous before God. So in Scripture, they basically, as I said, they took all of Scripture, everything. The word Pentateuch, I never covered that one. Pentateuch, Penta is 5. Pentateuch, that's the 5 books. So it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those 5, they took those as well as all of the other ones. We'll see is a little different than the Sadducees. So they will talk about the prophets. They will talk about other portions of scriptures. And when Jesus is speaking to them, he will feel very free about talking all different aspects of that. And when Jesus talks to the Sadducees, he talks to them on their grounds and so forth. So notable Pharisees are Paul, Nicodemus, and so they're good examples of that. They would be kind of, some of the scribes are Pharisees and that sort of thing, but they're kind of a mixed bag there. The Sadducees are a different group. We don't know as much about Sadducees. We know actually everything that we have about the Sadducees is negative, whether it be in the Bible or outside of the Bible by other Jewish scholars. Everything about them is negative, which maybe is not quite a fair thing to them, but is certainly, they had their part in Jesus' crucifixion and everything. But Jesus interacts with them less frequency. They might be thought of as kind of like more liberal in their views of Scripture. So they only took the first 5 books, and then they didn't believe any of the rest of it. And so that's why, interestingly enough, as a bonus content, Jesus, when he's dealing with them, he deals with them from what they believe. He always is he's taking people's own beliefs and he's saying, you don't hold up to your own beliefs. So I just find that interesting. But they only believe in the Pentateuch, those first 5 books, and they don't believe the rest. They don't believe in like the resurrection of the body. They don't believe in prophecy in the same sort of way. And so they interact with him less often. And I basically just said all that. So they don't believe in the supernatural and so forth. The only Pharisee that is possible, it's Pharisee, it's not quite proven, is probably Caiaphas, because he was the chief priest, and the priests tend to be Sadducees more, whereas the elders tend to be more Pharisees. But we don't know specifically. So, and then one last thing. You also hear this other word, Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is basically a governing body, which is made up of a lot of people, and most of them were either Pharisees or Sadducees. So that's why you hear it kind of used intermixed. An easy way for us to maybe understand that nowadays would be as if somebody was to talk about political, the fact that we have both Democrats and Republicans and maybe a few independents here and so forth in the same body of judicial. Does that make sense? So there's different groups within the same thing, and that's what you had in the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin were the ones that were basically had the trial over Jesus. And so there was a mix of both Pharisees and Sadducees in that. And that's our moment of learning for today.